Welcome to the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit. These weekly podcasts feature expository messages delivered to edify the soul. Now let's join Pastor Dave as he presents this week's message. If you have your Bibles with you today, would you turn with me to John chapter 20. John chapter 20, we'll begin our reading in verse 11, and we'll read down through verse 18. 11 through 18. But Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and seeth two angels in white sitting, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And they say unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She saith unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. And she turned herself and said unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren, and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and to your Father, and to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken these things unto her. John's mother told him to go to the apple store and buy an apple. John went early in the day, but all the apples were gone. The apple store didn't look like an apple store anymore. He didn't understand. Somehow it had changed. He looked diligently through the store, but only found 2 shiny golden tomatoes. What happened to the apple store, John thought. He continued to look for apples and soon found the gardener who grew the apples. What are you looking for? The gardener asked him. I'm looking for the apples. Where have you put the apples? John asked. The gardener said, John, go home and tell your mother that she will never have to buy an apple ever again. She is looking for apples, and she doesn't find any. But what she finds is so much better. Notice there in verse 11, as we begin this passage, it says Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. Well, let's stay there just for a moment with Mary. She stood there at the sepulchre. And what's she doing there? The disciples have gone, right? They looked in, stooped down, saw the linen clothes lie, made their assumptions. John believed, Peter wasn't sure, and then they left. But not Mary. Mary apparently had followed them. Back there in verse 2, she ran and came to Simon, Peter, and John, told them what she had found. Stones rolled away. They have taken him. You know, the they again. They have taken him. And everybody runs. John runs. Peter runs. Apparently, Mary followed them. She ran there. She's not afraid to run. Perhaps she ran back after them. And we didn't know it until we get to verse 11. And John and Peter leave, and there stands Mary. She's still there. She stayed when the disciples left. Of course, this is Mary, though. Mary stayed and watched as Joseph put the body in the tomb. Mary stayed far off and watched as they entombed Christ. She watched as they wrapped him in the linen clothes. She watched. She wanted to know exactly, precisely where the body of Jesus was going to be found, so that later she could come and do the rites of burial that the women wanted to do. So here, she's staying again. The disciples are all gone. They've made their inquiry into the tomb, and she's still there. She's standing. When you're seeking Christ, sometimes it takes diligence. It takes standing. When everybody else is gone, it takes remaining. And she knew that this was the best place for her to get any information at all on where her Lord might be. So she waits. She's standing there at the sepulchre. And it says that weeping, and as she wept. So we want to know, why is Mary weeping? We, of course, know the answer to that question, don't we? It's really not a question that we need an answer to. When we lose someone close to us, we find the room that they occupied in our lives is empty. The life they projected is no longer there. And so there's a void in our life. And that void, when we look at that void, or when we think about that void, I'm not going to ever see that again. That person will never be here in this life. I'll never be able to kiss my father on the forehead ever again. I'll never be able to hug my mom ever again. And so those voids in our life are profound. And when we first lose that person, it's hard. It hurts. Every one of us seated here in this sanctuary, we have all experienced this. It's one of those parts of life that we don't talk a lot about because it so hurts. Even now, years later, after someone dear has parted, we manage the grief, but there's still grief there because they're gone. So Mary is fresh into the wrestle, the match with the wrestling match with grief. She's dealing with it. She watched them crucify her Lord, and she watched them wrap his body, and she watched them bury him in that sepulchre. And now she's come back and the stones rolled away. Can you imagine what she's supposed to do now? She doesn't even have a place of memorial any longer. There's no graveside for her to go to now. She's a mess. The absence is horrible. But imagine all that Mary personally lost. Luke is the one who gives us the most information about Mary. In Luke chapter 8, in verses 2 and 3, in verses 2 and 3 we have this. A certain woman which had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary, called Magdalene, out of whom went 7 devils. And Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others, which ministered unto him of their substance. So Mary has been healed of evil spirits, and there were 7. Do you remember the story that Jesus told about if an evil spirit goes out of a man, and then he goes and he gathers up 7 more spirits more wicked than he, and he goes back to the man and he finds his room swept and clean, and now the state of the man is worse because now there are all these others in there? That's where Mary was. She was in the state that's worse than. She was sick, healed of evil spirits and infirmities. But that's one thing. Her deliverance is wonderful and it's magnificent, and it points to the greatness of Christ. But then she not only had that healing and her life restored, but she was given a purpose because she joined with Joanna and with Susanna and with many other women who ministered to Jesus from their substance, it says. So these women must have had money, or at least an estate that they could draw on. And so they're traveling around with Jesus. Why? Because of what he's done for them. And so this is now is her life. So not only does she lose the man who had redeemed her from the devils, she loses her teacher. She now is a part of something, this organization of believers that, has been going around Galilee and Judea and Syria and all those parts where Jesus traveled all the time. When we read about his travels, we don't read it, but we can certainly know that Mary and Joanna and Susanna and the other women are there in the background. And so they're enjoying all of what we read about. And she's been given this purpose to care for him. All of that now is destroyed. Her fellowship, her community, her Lord who had delivered her, her purpose in life, it's all gone. She's lost everything in the death of Christ. And of course, when I say her community, that is that group of believers that were there with Jesus, the 12, and then those that were outside of even that group, that's been shattered. The 12 are in hiding. Everybody else is scattered. So Mary lost a lot. And yet, here she is at the tomb. Her diligence in devotion is absolutely brilliant and should encourage every one of us. She doesn't go home and hide. She stays there at the tomb. An empty tomb, no less, because she's hoping that someone will come along and she can ask him, where is he? Where's the body that was right here? So while she's there, she does exactly what the disciples did earlier in the chapter. Peter and John both stooped down. Well, Peter ran in. John stooped down and looked in. Well, here she does the same thing. She stoops down and she looks into the sepulchre. Notice that there in verse 11. She, like John, had to stoop and look into the tomb, but she had a totally different experience than the men did. What did the men see? Linen clothes, right? The wrappings. They saw the linen, and it was still had the impression of a body because it was still all wrapped up. It still had the 100-pound weight of all the spices in it. It still had all the impressions of knees and elbows, shoulders and hips. It had all that. Ankles, It still looked like a body. The shell was still there, but the body was gone. And the napkin wrapped up by itself in another place, which, of course, I just absolutely love that. But that's not what she sees. I'm sure it was there, but that's not what she sees. She stoops down and she looks in and she sees something completely different. She sees angels. You see, you never know what you're going to see when you stoop down and you look into the wonderful places of God's Word. And this sight of angels was just for Mary. Mary hadn't given up. Her devotion was driving her. Her love for Christ had brought her there. She was earnestly seeking Him. She looks into the sepulchre and she sees angels. And she sees two angels, it says, sitting in white sitting. The linen clothes were lying, but the angels are sitting. And it says one at the head and the other at the feet where the body of Jesus was laying. One of my Puritan commentators on this passage said this reminded him of the top of the ark, the mercy seat, with the two cherubim, and they're facing one another, one on one side, one on the other side. And here we have the body of Jesus on that stone bench, but not there any longer, but we have an angel on one end and an angel on the other end. The mercy seat. I like that. They were on the bench, and the bench had forever been marked with the position of Jesus. And so they, one at the head and the other at the feet, were sitting there, and they said unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Now, do you notice anything missing here? They didn't say, fear not. Angels usually say, fear not, don't they? When they show up. You know why they didn't say, fear not? Because Mary's not afraid. Mary's not afraid. These angels don't need to say, fear not. She looks down and she looks at those angels, and they say, why are you weeping? And she just launches right into her reason why she's weeping. She's not going to put up with some angels asking her questions. So you're angels, so what? I'm looking for Jesus. I'm not looking for angels. But she has a vision of angels when she looks into that tomb. And of course, because the angels ask her that question, you know that Mary, she just must have been sobbing. And she's crying, and her face is wet with them. And her eyes are red, and her nose is running, and she's quivering because of the grief. You know how you get when you start to cry like that. But even through all of that, bless her, she stoops down and looks into that empty tomb. And because of that devotion, she sees angels. Now, the angels, they're compassionate when they ask this question, I think. They say, Woman, why weepest thou? I don't think, when you were a kid and you fell off your bike and you skinned your knee, your dad said, get up and rub it off, right? And you're crying, oh, skinned my knee up. Your dad said, put a bandage on it. Rub some dirt on it and go on your way, right? Yeah, that's dad for you. And mom will say, honey, what's the matter? That's the difference. One's compassionate, the other one's compassionate in a sort of sideways way. Dads are compassionate, they're just different. But moms have that tender compassion, that loving kindness. That's what this is. Woman, why weepest thou? It's loving kindness. The angels know why she's weeping, or at least I hope they do. Do they understand human emotion? Who knows? Probably they do. Or is it because the wonderful victory that Jesus had gained over the grave, they want to know why she doesn't understand. Why are you weeping? Don't you get this? Don't you see us sitting here on the place where Jesus laid? Look at the linen clothes. Here we are, one at the head and one at the feet. You see, they were on the bench, and the bench had forever been marked with the position of Jesus. The grave had now become a sitting room for angels. Why weepest thou? And of course, she doesn't hesitate at all. She says, because they, there's our they again, notice that there in verse 13, they have taken away my Lord. She gives them the reason. This is the reason that she gave the disciples. They have taken him away. We don't know where they've put him. Here she comes to the angels and they say, why are you weeping? And she says, they have taken away my Lord. She's sticking with her story here. Notice how her statement in verse 2 is the same. This is the they. Those monsters who did this are to be blamed. Now she's telling that to the angels. And she's looking at angels in the tomb. And I don't know where they've laid him. Now it comes down to it. Now here it is. First it was, we don't know where they've laid him. And she's talking about the other ladies because the other ladies are putting together a plan to do something wonderful for their Lord. And now she says, I don't know where they laid him. There it is. There now we get to the kernel of the thing. She feels responsible for caring for her Savior. I don't know where they laid him. Her devotion to Christ, her love for him is so strong. Verse 14. And when she had said, and then when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing and knew not that it was Jesus. Mary wasn't looking for a resurrected Jesus. She was looking for apples. Right? She was looking for something else. She was looking for a torn and twisted Jesus, wrapped in linen cloth, covered with 100 pounds of spikenard and myrrh. This couldn't be him. You would never think, if you're looking for a dead body and you feel someone behind you, or you happen to notice through your peripheral vision, there's someone out to the side, and you turn, well, you're not thinking it's going to be the person you're looking for because they're dead. One of my Puritan authors said that he thinks that perhaps the angels stood when they saw Jesus. Of course, they're looking out the door. Mary's looking in the door. And so as they're looking over her shoulder, they see the risen Christ, and they stand up. And maybe that's what made her turn around. Well, of course, the text doesn't tell us that. But she turns around. She's standing. She sees Jesus, and he's standing there, and she doesn't know that it's him. And what does he ask her? The very same thing that the angels ask her. Why are you weeping? Woman, why weepest thou? You notice it's the same as the angels. This, of course, is rhetorical because Christ knows why she's weeping. He knows what's in the human heart. He knew her compassion. He knew her need. He knew her devotion. He knew that she wanted to honor him. He knew that she had to come and honor the one who had delivered her from a living hell. But then he adds this second question. Whom seekest thou? What a wonderful testimony about her that the Savior gives. Notice those words. Whom seekest thou? She's seeking. She hasn't stopped seeking. Since we began there in verse 11, Mary stood without at the sepulchre. She was seeking Jesus. The disciples were satisfied. They left. She wasn't satisfied. She kept on. She stooped down, looked in, had a conversation with angels, turns around, and now she's thinking she's talking to the gardener, and he says, who do you seek? Well, who do you think I seek? She's looked past the angels, and now she sees what she thinks is the gardener. And as wonderful as the angels are, they cannot satisfy the human soul. Be careful, ladies and gentlemen, of angel worship. It will not satisfy. Never has, never will. But there are a lot of people who are so interested in angels that they will look past the risen Christ to the angels. The angels are pointing to Jesus. They're not pointing to themselves. Let's not get distracted by angels. Let's not be looking for them. Let's not be asking for them. That's not what we should be looking for. We should be seeking the risen Christ. So they're wonderful, but they cannot satisfy. They cannot bring peace to a troubled heart. Only Jesus can. And she is looking with all her heart for Jesus, but sadly, she's looking for a dead Jesus. She is looking for an apple, and only an apple. And she, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Mary interrogates the gardener. It is no more they. Notice it's now if you. She doesn't know where he's gone or who's taken him, so she just decides, maybe I should ask. Because perhaps this guy, this gardener fellow, maybe he's in the employ of Joseph of Arimathea, and he came early this morning to do his work, taking care of Joseph's new tomb. Maybe he was going to do some weed eating or something, and he noticed that there was a body in the tomb, so he moved the stone out of the way. He went in and got the body out, and he's put it in some other pauper's grave. Because this is Joseph's tomb. This doesn't belong to somebody else. Why would somebody put a strange body in Joseph's tomb? So perhaps she thinks he works for Joseph. Sir, if you've borne him hence. Notice that she uses the word sir here. So she's very polite in her address to this man. She doesn't accuse him. She just wants to know. That's all she's after. She's seeking Jesus. She's not trying to burn bridges with everybody. Sir, if you've borne him hence. Notice that she doesn't give the explanation she gave the angels. She says, tell me where you've laid him. Jesus is still just a body in Mary's mind, wrapped in linen that needs to be cared for by laying him in a grave. I will take him away. So blinded by her grief, Mary's heartache reaches a crescendo here. I will take him away. Again, we can't pass that up. This is what Mary wants to do. She, there in, what verse was it? Verse 13, she says, I know not where they've laid him. Now, we have the first person again here. She says, I will take him away. Blinded by her grief, Mary's heartache reaches a crescendo, and she doesn't know where he is. She wants to take him and put him someplace where she can memorialize him. Where does she think she's going to put him, though? And can a single woman carry this man who's dead and wrapped in 100 pounds worth of spices to another grave? No. But this is the strength of devotion because she thinks she can. And if she can't, by golly, she'll get some boys together that can do the job for her. Right? She's not afraid of this work. She says, I will take him away. Still, she must care for him. And it doesn't matter that she can't do something. Never could do nothing. That's Mary's motto here. But then Jesus breaks all of that with one simple word. He says to her, Mary. Beautiful. Do you remember John chapter 10? Jesus talking about the door of the sheepfold. He tells us that the sheep know the shepherd's voice. And when he said Mary, she said, Master. She knew who it was then because he spoke her name. Oh, she knows exactly now. This is none other than her master, Rabboni. It says they're interesting that we're given the language here transliterated for us into English, Rabboni. This means, and I don't know why they don't translate it this way, but it means my master. But it's not just my master. This word Rabboni means my great master. The great teachers were called rabbin. And this is that word, rabbin. But here it's Rabboni. So it's my great teacher. She says, my great teacher. She turns herself unto him. And don't you know that, of course, Jesus says there in verse 17, touch me not. Don't you know what she was about to do? Yeah, I mean, exactly right. Wouldn't every one of us do the same thing? Someone just now suddenly appears, we think they're dead, and we lunge at them and grab them and hug them and kiss them about the neck and face. Surely that's what she was going to do. Or maybe fall at his feet and embrace the feet of Jesus. Something. She was going to do something like that. And Jesus says, whoa, wait a minute. Touch me not. Touch me not. I have not yet ascended to my Father. No doubt her first instinct was to lunge on him and to hug him. Of course, it would have been ours. We understand this. Jesus said, I'm not gone to my Father yet. Go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend unto my Father and to your Father, to my God and your God. The disciples now receive word that the great act of redemption is being accomplished. Jesus is going to ascend. You know, we're told in the Old Testament that the pattern of the things down here are made after the likeness of what is there. So Jesus goes there to the real. He says, go to my brethren and tell them, I ascend to my Father, to your Father, to my God, and to your God. So the disciples are going to receive this word, and it's going to come from the woman who stayed at the tomb. This great devotional act of Mary pays in spades. Because now not only does she see angels, she sees the risen Christ, and he himself speaks to her and gives her a message. So she becomes the very first apostle to the apostles. She tells them the good news. Never again will we have to look at death as hopeless. Yes, we have to still deal with the loss and the emptiness and the hurt that death brings. But ladies and gentlemen, there's hope. One day I will be gathered to my fathers, and I will join them and my mother and all the family that I've ever known and all the believers who have ever touched my life. They'll be there one day because I will join them there. It's a hope, and it's a hope that only Jesus gives. And Mary Magdalene came and she told the disciples. I always wonder when I read verse 18, I wonder if she ran. It doesn't say that she did. But I think if there's any reason to run in this chapter, Mary has a reason to run here in verse 18. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord. Just like what they said to Thomas. Remember that? We've seen the Lord. Thomas said, well, here's Mary, and she has the same words. And I guess, really, whenever Thomas shows up, they remembered what Mary said and said, well, that'll work. We'll just tell him that because we have seen the Lord. So Mary frames the very first language of gospel witness. We've seen the Lord. And that he had spoken these things unto her. She has something to report. Her purpose is back. And you notice there, if we compared what she says to the disciples with verse 2, in verse 2 it says, they have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him. Now she comes in and she says, I've seen the Lord, and this is what he said. And she tells them what Jesus said. So different, these two statements. One is a statement of dread, doubt, and fear. The other one, a statement of hope and future. Mary does become the first of the apostles. And her devotion teaches us, never again will we have to buy an apple.
Jesus will meet you.
Thanks for listening to this week's message. Please join us again next time for another installment of the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit.